The cold January evening cast long shadows across the convenience store parking lot as Officer Bradley Thompson sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching people hurry past in the fading light. His fingers drummed impatiently on the steering wheel as he spotted a figure shuffling near the store entrance. A homeless man in tattered layers, his belongings stuffed into a weathered backpack. Thompson had been on edge lately. His divorce was getting messy. His supervisor had been writing him about his aggressive approach to policing. And now this homeless person was making customers uncomfortable. He'd been looking for an excuse to assert his authority, to feel in control of something in his spiraling life. The store owner came out, gesturing anxiously toward the homeless man who was simply trying to stay warm near the building's heating vent. Thompson saw his opportunity. Stepping out of his cruiser, his boots crunched on the scattered rock salt as he approached, hand resting on his belt. "Time to move along," he barked, but the homeless man didn't immediately respond, instead pulling his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. That's when things escalated quickly. Thompson, interpreting the slow response as defiance, grabbed the man's arm roughly. The homeless man tried to explain he was just getting warm, his voice steady and articulate, something that seemed to anger Thompson even more. In a flash of rage and prejudice, Thompson's fist connected with the homeless man's face, sending him stumbling backward. The gasps of onlookers pierced the evening air. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, recording the incident. A young woman's voice rang out, "I'm streaming this live." Another bystander shouted, "Someone call the police on the police." What Thompson didn't realize, as he stood there breathing heavily, was that the man he just struck wasn't just another homeless person to be bullied. The blood trickling from the man's lip didn't mask the dignity in his eyes as he slowly straightened up, reaching into his shabby coat. Instead of an ID, he pulled out a hospital badge. In that moment, the evening air seemed to freeze completely. The badge identified him as Dr. David Chen, Chief of Neurosurgery at Metropolitan General Hospital. The small crowd that had gathered fell silent, phones still recording every second. Dr. Chen wiped his lip with the back of his hand, his voice calm but firm as he spoke. "I've been living on these streets for the past month, Officer Thompson, researching healthcare accessibility for our homeless population. Every moment has been documented for a major medical study." He gestured to a small camera pinned to his jacket, including this interaction. Thompson's face drained of color as realization dawned. The body camera on his chest was recording too, capturing his unprovoked assault on one of the city's most respected medical professionals. Already, sirens could be heard in the distance, other officers responding to the bystanders' calls. The crowd had grown larger now, their phones capturing every moment of this incredible scene. Some were already posting the videos online, where they would soon go viral. Others stood in shocked silence, watching as Thompson's world began to crumble around him. As red and blue lights began to flash at the edge of the parking lot, Dr. Chen stood tall despite his shabby appearance. He wasn't just a victim of police brutality. He was about to become the catalyst for a story that would shake the entire city to its core. The evening news would lead with this story. Social media would explode with the footage. But what no one knew yet was that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only Thompson's life, but the entire police department's approach to handling the homeless population. And it all started with a single punch thrown on a cold January evening outside a convenience store. The first responding officers arrived on scene, their expressions a mix of shock and dismay as they recognized both their colleague and the renowned doctor. As they approached, Dr. Chen remained composed, his researcher's notebook visible in his backpack, filled with 30 days of observations that would soon become evidence of a much larger problem than one officer's moment of rage. The next morning, the story broke like a thunderstorm across the city. Dr. Chen's true identity spread rapidly through news channels and social media. People couldn't stop talking about the respected neurosurgeon who had given up his comfortable life to live on the streets, all for the sake of understanding the healthcare struggles of the homeless. Local news vans lined up outside Metropolitan General Hospital, where Dr. Chen had returned to his normal duties, though now sporting a visible bruise on his face. Inside his office, decorated with medical awards and family photos, he sat reviewing the extensive notes from his month-long experiment. The contrast between his current appearance, now in a crisp white coat, and the footage of him from the previous night was striking. During his first press conference, Dr. Chen spoke with the same calm dignity he'd shown during the incident. This was never about catching anyone doing wrong, he explained to the packed room of reporters. It was about understanding what our homeless neighbors face every day. Healthcare isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about understanding the whole person. The hospital's waiting room was filled with journalists hoping to get more details, but Dr. Chen was already back at work, reviewing patient files. His colleagues looked at him differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Many had no idea that their chief of neurosurgery had been conducting such powerful research. Meanwhile, at the police station, things were chaotic. Officer Thompson had been placed on immediate administrative leave. Internal affairs investigators pored over his past cases, finding a pattern of aggressive behavior, particularly toward homeless individuals. His personnel file, once sealed, was now under intense scrutiny. The police chief called an emergency press conference, sweating under the harsh lights as he tried to distance the department from Thompson's actions. This incident does not reflect our values, he stated, but the public wasn't buying it. Social media was flooded with similar stories from other homeless individuals who had faced harassment. But the most fascinating development came from Dr. Chen's research itself. His notebook revealed shocking statistics about how homeless people were treated in emergency rooms, the barriers they faced in getting basic care, and the prejudices they encountered from medical professionals and law enforcement alike. Local news stations aired interviews with homeless individuals who recognized Dr. Chen from his time on the streets. He was different, one man said, his voice rough from years of living outdoors. He actually listened to us. He shared his food. We had no idea he was a doctor. He was just a kind soul who seemed to really care. Community organizations began reaching out to Dr. Chen, asking him to share his experiences. His research was becoming more than just a medical study. It was turning into a movement. Healthcare administrators from other hospitals started calling, wanting to learn more about his findings. The footage of the incident had reached millions of views online. Comments poured in from around the country, with many medical professionals and students saying they were inspired to do similar research in their own communities. The story was no longer just about one officer's mistake. It was sparking a national conversation about dignity, healthcare, and how society treats its most vulnerable members. As the day drew to a close, Dr. Chen sat in his office, looking out over the city lights. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests and messages of support. But his mind was on something bigger. Tomorrow, he would present his findings to the hospital board, pushing for major changes in how they treated homeless patients. The bruise on his face was a small price to pay for the attention his research was now receiving. What had started as a personal project to understand patient care had transformed into something much larger, a catalyst for change that would ripple through the medical community and law enforcement alike. That evening, as Dr. Chen packed up his research materials, a nurse stopped by his office. She handed him a stack of letters from hospital staff, each one sharing their own experiences and pledging to do better. Change was coming, and it had taken one brave doctor stepping out of his comfort zone to set it in motion. The sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows through Dr. Chen's office window. Day 2 of this incredible story was ending, but its impact was just beginning to unfold. The media storm that followed was unlike anything the city had ever seen. News vans crowded the streets, reporters jostled for position outside the police station, and social media buzzed with every new development. The viral video of the incident had sparked a nationwide conversation about police conduct and healthcare inequality. Local Channel 5 ran an in-depth segment revealing Officer Thompson's history of complaints, 15 in total, all swept under the rug by the department. The reporter, a veteran journalist with salt and pepper hair, stood outside the precinct, explaining how many of these complaints came from homeless individuals who felt powerless to fight back. But this time, the reporter said into the camera, things are different. This time, the victim wasn't just another voiceless person on the street. This time, it was one of the city's most respected doctors. The police department spokesperson tried desperately to control the narrative. In a hastily arranged press conference, she stumbled through prepared statements about ongoing investigations and commitment to community relations. But the damage was already done. The city council announced an emergency meeting to discuss police reform. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen's research began making waves in medical circles. His detailed notes revealed shocking statistics. Homeless patients waited 3 times longer in emergency rooms, received less pain medication for the same conditions, and were often discharged without proper follow-up care. His notebook included heart-wrenching stories of people choosing between medicine and food. One particular entry caught the media's attention. Dr. Chen had written about an elderly homeless man who died from a treatable infection because multiple clinics had turned him away. He didn't die from his illness, Dr. Chen had written. He died from indifference. The story took an unexpected turn when local business owners started coming forward. The convenience store owner from the night of the incident spoke to reporters, his voice shaking as he admitted feeling guilty about calling the police on homeless people. "I never thought about where they would go," he said. "I just wanted them gone. Now I can't stop thinking about it." Community organizations seized the moment. Homeless advocacy groups organized rallies, but they weren't angry protests. They were educational events. Former homeless individuals shared their stories. Medical students set up free health screening stations. Local restaurants provided hot meals. The police union remained surprisingly quiet. Internal sources leaked that they were divided over the incident. Younger officers, in particular, were pushing for change, tired of the old guard's defensive stance. Some even began volunteering at homeless shelters during their off-duty hours. Social media played its part too. The hashtag #StreetDoctorChallenge went viral, with medical professionals spending time with homeless communities in their areas. Videos of doctors sleeping on streets and experiencing firsthand the challenges of homeless life flooded the internet. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when a group of homeless individuals organized their own press conference in the park. They spoke about Dr. Chen not as a doctor conducting research, but as the kind man who had shared their struggles for a month. "He sat with us, ate with us, listened to us," one woman said, her voice clear and strong. "He treated us like human beings." Local news cameras captured something extraordinary that evening. Business owners bringing coffee and sandwiches to the homeless people they had previously shooed away. It was a small gesture, but it signaled the beginning of a change in attitudes. As day 3 drew to a close, the city felt different. The initial shock of the incident had transformed into something more meaningful. A collective realization a change was not just necessary, but possible. Dr. Chen's research had cracked open a door that many had tried to keep shut. In hospitals across the city, administrators began reviewing their policies. Police precincts started discussing new training programs. And in coffee shops and dinner tables throughout the community, people were having uncomfortable but necessary conversations about privilege, compassion, and responsibility. The sun set on another day of this unfolding story, but unlike other viral moments that fade quickly, this one showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it was gathering momentum, pushing the city toward a reckoning with its conscience. And somewhere in the city, Dr. Chen was already planning his next move, one that would shake the foundations of both the medical and law enforcement communities even further. Just as the city was grappling with Dr. Chen's revelations, fate threw an unexpected twist into the story. Late one evening, Officer Thompson rushed into the emergency room of Metropolitan General Hospital, his face twisted with worry. In his arms was his teenage daughter, unconscious and barely breathing. The emergency room staff quickly discovered she had a severe brain aneurysm, a ticking time bomb in her head that could rupture at any moment. The on-call neurosurgeon was hours away at another hospital, and time was running out. There was only one doctor in the city skilled enough to perform the delicate surgery immediately, Dr. Chen. Thompson sat in the waiting room, his police uniform rumpled, his head in his hands. The same nurses he previously intimidated during his patrols now walked past him, their faces a mix of recognition and concern. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. When Dr. Chen walked into the waiting room, the air seemed to freeze. Hospital staff held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Thompson looked up, his face pale and drawn, immediately recognizing the man he had struck just days before. The bruise was still visible on Dr. Chen's face. "Your daughter needs emergency surgery," Dr. Chen said simply, his voice professional and calm. "I'm the best chance she has right now." He handed Thompson the consent forms, their eyes meeting for the first time since that night outside the convenience store. Thompson's hands shook as he signed the papers. "I don't deserve your help," he whispered, his voice breaking. "After what I did." Dr. Chen cut him off gently. "Right now, you're not Officer Thompson, and I'm not the man you met on the street. You're a father, I'm a doctor, and your daughter needs us both to focus on what's important." The next few hours were tense. Hospital staff worked efficiently, preparing for surgery while trying to ignore the complex dynamics at play. In the operating room, Dr. Chen worked with the same steady hands that had earned him his reputation, carefully navigating the delicate blood vessels in the young girl's brain. Outside in the waiting room, Thompson paced. Other officers began showing up to support their colleague, creating an unusual scene. The same police department that was under investigation for brutality, now anxiously awaiting news from the very man they had wronged. Local news crews gathered outside the hospital, but for once, they stayed respectfully distant. This wasn't just another segment about police brutality or healthcare inequality. This was a deeply human moment unfolding before their eyes. As dawn broke, Dr. Chen emerged from surgery, still in his surgical scrubs. The waiting room fell silent as he approached Thompson. "The surgery was successful," he said quietly. "Your daughter is going to be fine." Thompson broke down, tears streaming down his face. The other officers watched as their colleague, known for his tough exterior, sobbed openly with relief. Without thinking, he reached out to hug Dr. Chen, the same man he had struck with his fist just days ago. The moment was captured by a nurse's phone camera and would later become a powerful symbol of redemption and humanity. But for now, it was simply a genuine moment between two men, one who had done wrong, and one who chose to rise above it. As Dr. Chen headed to his office to complete his paperwork, he passed the hospital's security cameras. They were the same type that had captured his assault, but today they recorded something very different. A doctor doing what doctors do best, saving lives without prejudice or judgment. The morning shift was arriving, and word of the night's events spread quickly through the hospital corridors. Staff members who had been following the story found themselves seeing both men in a new light. The narrative was shifting from one of conflict to one of redemption. In his office, Dr. Chen looked at the frame on his wall containing his Hippocratic oath. The words, "First, do no harm," seemed to carry new weight today. He had done more than save a life. He had shown that sometimes the best revenge is simply doing what's right. The sun rose fully over the city, marking the beginning of a new day. But this day would be different from all the others in this unfolding story. Something profound had changed overnight, something that would affect not just Officer Thompson and Dr. Chen, but the entire community's understanding of justice, forgiveness, and the power of choosing compassion over vengeance. The days following the successful surgery brought profound changes that no one had expected. Officer Thompson spent long hours by his daughter's hospital bed, watching her recover while struggling with his own inner turmoil. The same hospital corridors he had once patrolled with arrogance now felt like paths to his own redemption. During his daughter's recovery, Thompson couldn't help but notice things he previously ignored. He watched homeless patients receive care in the emergency room, seeing their humanity instead of viewing them as problems to be solved. He observed the exhausted faces of people who had waited hours for treatment, many of whom reminded him of those he'd hastily judged on the streets. One afternoon, while getting coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Thompson overheard two nurses discussing Dr. Chen's research. They talked about a homeless man who had died waiting for care, afraid to seek help because of past experiences with law enforcement. The coffee suddenly felt bitter in Thompson's mouth as he realized how many lives his actions might have affected. Dr. Chen, meanwhile, continued his regular rounds, checking on all his patients, including Thompson's daughter. During one such visit, he found Thompson reading through a printed copy of his research paper. "I never knew," Thompson said quietly, looking up from the pages. "I never tried to know." Their conversations, initially awkward and brief, gradually became longer and more meaningful. Thompson shared stories about his own struggles, the pressure of the job, his failed marriage, the anger that had slowly poisoned his perspective. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally sharing insights from his month on the streets. The media caught wind of this unexpected development. Reporters tried to capture these interactions, but both men maintained their privacy. This wasn't about creating headlines anymore. It was about genuine transformation. One evening, Thompson watched as Dr. Chen treated a homeless patient who had been brought in with pneumonia. The doctor's gentle approach, his patience in explaining the treatment, and his respect for the patient's dignity made Thompson think about all the times he treated similar individuals with contempt. The turning point came when Thompson's daughter, still recovering but growing stronger each day, asked to hear the full story of what had happened. Instead of making excuses, Thompson told her everything. Her response was simple but powerful. "Dad, you always taught me to make things right when I mess up. So what are you going to do about this?" That question led Thompson to make a decision that would surprise everyone. During one of Dr. Chen's visits, he asked about joining the hospital's new community outreach program. "I want to understand," he said. "I want to help make changes in how we handle these situations." The hospital staff watched this transformation with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Some remembered Thompson's past behavior all too well, but they couldn't deny the sincerity in his efforts to change. They saw him helping lost visitors find their way, speaking kindly to the cleaning staff, and most importantly, treating homeless patients with respect. Dr. Chen's influence extended beyond just Thompson. Other officers began stopping by the hospital, not to harass or intimidate, but to learn. They asked questions about healthcare access, about the challenges faced by homeless individuals, about how they could do their jobs better. The police chief, seeing the potential for positive change, reluctantly agreed to let Thompson help develop a new training program once he returned to duty. It would focus on understanding homelessness, mental health, and the importance of compassionate policing. As Thompson's daughter grew stronger, so did the unlikely bond between the officer and the doctor. Their story was becoming something neither man had expected, a testament to the power of understanding and forgiveness. 1 month after the surgery, during a quiet moment in the hospital garden, Thompson finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why did you help my daughter after what I did to you?" Dr. Chen's response was simple but profound. "Because that's how change happens. Not through force or fear, but through showing people a better way. Sometimes, the best teacher is mercy." The sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the garden. In just a few weeks, both men had traveled a long way from that dark night outside the convenience store. Their journey wasn't over, but they had found something valuable along the way. The understanding that real change starts with seeing the humanity in others, even those who have wronged us. As Officer Thompson returned to work, the weight of his transformation was visible in every step he took. The precinct felt different now. His fellow officers watched curiously as he cleaned out his desk, removing old citations he'd written to homeless individuals, replacing them with Dr. Chen's research papers and community resource guides. His first day back started with mandatory bias training, but Thompson surprised everyone by raising his hand at the beginning of the session. "Before we start," he said, standing up in front of his colleagues, "I want to share my story." The room fell silent as he spoke about his daughter's surgery, Dr. Chen's forgiveness, and the lessons he'd learned during his time at the hospital. The training instructor, a veteran officer turned educator, stood back and let Thompson speak. Other officers leaned forward in their chairs, some nodding in recognition of their own biases, others shifting uncomfortably as Thompson described the anger and prejudice that had driven his actions. "We're not just law enforcement," Thompson said, his voice steady. "We're community caretakers. And I forgot that somewhere along the way." Word spread quickly through the department about Thompson's changed attitude. Some officers scoffed, calling him soft. But others, especially younger recruits, began seeking his advice. During coffee breaks, they'd gather around his desk, asking questions about handling situations with homeless individuals differently. One rookie officer shared a story about a homeless woman he encountered the previous night. Instead of forcing her to move along, he'd remembered Thompson's words and connected her with a local shelter. "She cried and thanked me," the rookie said. "I'd never felt better about doing my job." Thompson's transformation didn't stop at the precinct. He started spending his lunch breaks at the hospital, sitting with homeless patients in the waiting room, listening to their stories. He learned about veterans who'd lost their way, families broken by medical debt, and people struggling with mental health issues. Dr. Chen noticed these changes during his regular rounds. He'd spot Thompson in the cafeteria, sharing coffee with the same homeless individuals he once would have arrested. The bruise on Dr. Chen's face had long since faded, but the impact of their encounter continued to create ripples throughout the community. The police chief, initially skeptical, couldn't ignore the positive changes. Complaints against officers in Thompson's unit dropped significantly. Other precincts began requesting information about their new approach to handling homeless individuals. Local news outlets, which had once vilified Thompson, now covered his efforts to reform police practices. One rainy evening, Thompson responded to a call about a disturbance outside a local business. He found a homeless man, soaking wet, trying to stay dry under an awning. Instead of immediately reaching for his handcuffs, Thompson remembered his training. He talked with the man, learned he was a diabetic who'd lost his medication, and helped connect him with medical care. That same night, the man ended up in Dr. Chen's emergency room. When he mentioned the kind officer who'd helped him, Dr. Chen smiled, knowing exactly who it was. The hospital staff, who had witnessed Thompson's journey from antagonist to advocate, shared knowing looks. Thompson's daughter, fully recovered now, started volunteering at the hospital's outreach programs. She wore her father's transformation like a badge of honor, telling anyone who would listen about how one act of forgiveness had changed not just her father, but an entire community's approach to homelessness. During a community meeting, Thompson stood beside Dr. Chen, presenting their joint initiative for police medical cooperation in helping homeless individuals. The room was packed with officers, medical professionals, and community members, all witnessing something remarkable: the power of personal transformation to inspire institutional change. "I used to think my badge gave me power," Thompson told the audience. "But real power comes from understanding, from seeing the humanity in every person we serve." As the sun set on another day of change, Thompson sat in his patrol car, looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The angry officer from that cold night outside the convenience store was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of his career: that true strength lies not in controlling others, but in controlling our own prejudices and fears. The city was changing, one small interaction at a time, and at the heart of this change was a story of redemption that continued to inspire others to examine their own biases and choose a better path. On a bright morning at City Hall, the community gathered for what would become a historic moment. Officer Thompson stood at the podium, facing a packed room of citizens, police officers, healthcare workers, and most importantly, members of the homeless community. His hands trembled slightly as he held his prepared speech, but his voice was clear and strong. "A few months ago, I was a different person," he began. "I was the kind of officer who saw badges and uniforms instead of people, who used power instead of understanding, who caused harm instead of helping." He paused, looking directly at Dr. Chen and the audience. "But sometimes, life gives you a second chance through the very people you've wronged." The crowd listened intently as Thompson outlined his proposal for a new police community program. The initiative would pair officers with healthcare workers during patrols, create safe spaces for homeless individuals to seek help without fear, and establish mandatory sensitivity training for all law enforcement personnel. Dr. Chen stepped up next, sharing the final results of his research. The numbers were shocking. Incidents of police confrontations with homeless individuals had dropped by 60% in areas where officers had received the new training. Emergency room visits by homeless patients had increased, showing they felt safer seeking medical care. A homeless veteran stood up during the public comment section, his voice shaking with emotion. "Last week, I had a seizure on the street," he said. "Instead of being treated like a criminal, the officers called a medical team. They saved my life. This is what change looks like." The city council members exchanged glances as more people shared similar stories. The old way of handling homelessness through force and intimidation was clearly failing. Thompson's program offered a new path forward. Local business owners, who had once demanded aggressive police action against homeless people near their shops, now spoke about setting up water stations and rest areas. "We're all part of the same community," said one restaurant owner who had converted his storage room into a small medical clinic. The police chief, who had initially resisted these changes, stood up to make a surprising announcement. "Starting next month, all officers will undergo the new training program," he declared. "Officer Thompson and Dr. Chen will lead these sessions personally." As the meeting continued, Thompson's daughter sat in the audience, beaming with pride. She had become an advocate herself, starting a youth program to help homeless children stay in school. Her near-death experience had transformed not just her father, but her own understanding of community service. The local news crews captured something remarkable that day: police officers and homeless individuals sitting together, sharing stories and ideas for improvement. The us versus them mentality that had dominated for so long was crumbling. Dr. Chen's hospital had already implemented changes based on his research. The emergency room now had dedicated staff trained in handling homeless patients with dignity. Wait times had decreased, and follow-up care had improved dramatically. After the formal presentations, Thompson and Dr. Chen walked through the crowd together. People stopped them to share stories, ask questions, or simply express gratitude. A young police cadet approached Thompson, tears in her eyes. "You've shown us that it's okay to admit when we're wrong," she said. "That's real strength." Outside City Hall, a small group had set up tables with free medical supplies, food, and clothing for those in need. Officers in uniform helped distribute the items, chatting and laughing with people they once would have arrested for loitering. As the sun began to set, Thompson and Dr. Chen stood on the steps of City Hall, watching the community they had helped build. "You know," Thompson said quietly, "when you operated on my daughter, you didn't just save her life. You saved mine, too." Dr. Chen smiled, watching a patrol car stop to help a homeless man carry his bags. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness," he replied. The city was different now. Not perfect, but better. The walls between law enforcement, healthcare, and a homeless community were coming down, brick by brick. And it all started with one moment of violence transformed into an opportunity for growth and understanding. As people began to leave City Hall, the evening air was filled with a sense of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today had shown that change was possible when people chose to see the humanity in each other. The impact of Thompson and Dr. Chen's initiative spread far beyond their city. News outlets from across the country began featuring their story, and police departments from other states sent representatives to learn about their program. The small spark of change they had ignited was growing into a nationwide movement. One particularly cold morning, a group of police chiefs from major cities gathered in the hospital's conference room. They watched body camera footage from Thompson's recent patrols, showing his transformed approach to handling situations with homeless individuals. The difference was striking. Where there was once aggression, there was now patience and understanding. 6 months ago, I would have written tickets, made arrests, Thompson explained to the visiting officers. Now I ask questions first. Are you hungry? Do you need medical care? How can we help? He shared stories of lives changed through this new approach, including a former engineer who had lost everything to medical bills but was now back on his feet thanks to the program's support network. Dr. Chen's research had expanded too. His hospital became a model for others, with its dedicated homeless healthcare unit and partnership with local law enforcement. Emergency room staff reported a complete shift in atmosphere. Homeless patients now arrived with police escorts who helped explain medical histories instead of standing guard with handcuffs ready. The community impact was visible everywhere. Local businesses that had once called police to remove homeless people were now participating in a new initiative. They displayed blue hearts in their windows, signaling that their spaces were safe havens where people could rest, use restrooms, or get water without fear of harassment. A documentary filmmaker captured a powerful moment outside a downtown coffee shop. A police officer sat sharing coffee with a homeless woman, helping her fill out housing assistance forms. The same officer admitted on camera that just a year ago, he would have told her to move along or face arrest. The hospital's waiting room had transformed as well. What was once a place of tension became a space of healing. Social workers kept office hours there, connecting patients with resources while they waited for care. Police officers regularly stopped by, not to intimidate, but to check on people they had helped bring in for treatment. Thompson's daughter had recovered fully and started a youth volunteer program at the hospital. Young people worked alongside former homeless individuals who shared their stories, breaking down stereotypes and building understanding across generations. My dad taught me that it's never too late to change, she told a group of high school students. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best changes. The program's success caught the attention of state legislators. They visited the city to see firsthand how the collaboration between police and healthcare workers was reducing both crime rates and emergency room costs. The data was compelling. Homelessness-related arrests had dropped by 70%, while successful housing placements had doubled. Dr. Chen received invitations to speak at medical conferences nationwide, sharing not just his research but the human story behind it. He always started his presentations with a photo of his bruised face from that fateful night, then ended with a recent picture of him and Thompson teaching together at the police academy. 1 year after the incident, the city held a special ceremony. But it wasn't about awards or recognition. It was a community dinner where police officers, medical staff, business owners, and homeless individuals all shared meals together. The walls that had once divided them were replaced by tables of conversation and understanding. A local reporter captured the scene. Children playing with police officers' badges, doctors sitting with their former homeless patients who were now employed and housed, business owners planning future initiatives with community members they once feared. The story had evolved from one of conflict to one of connection. As the evening wound down, Thompson and Dr. Chen stood watching the diverse crowd interact. A newcomer to the city wouldn't have been able to tell who was who. The lines between helper and helped, protector and protected had blurred into something more human. "You know what the best part is," Thompson said, watching his fellow officers laughing with people they once would have arrested. "None of this feels like a program anymore. It just feels like community." Dr. Chen nodded, seeing one of his former homeless patients now volunteering, serving food to others. "That's how real change works," he replied. "It stops being about policies and procedures and starts being about people caring for people." 1 year to the day after the incident outside that convenience store, the city gathered for a remarkable celebration, but not to remember the conflict. Instead, they came together to honor the legacy of change that had grown from that moment. The same parking lot where Officer Thompson had once struck Dr. Chen was now transformed into a community health fair. Tents lined the space where medical staff provided free checkups. Police officers helped direct traffic and carried supplies, chatting easily with people they once would have viewed with suspicion. The convenience store owner, who had triggered the original incident with his call to police, now ran a free coffee and snack station for homeless visitors. Thompson and Dr. Chen stood side by side, watching as their vision had become reality. Children played in a designated kids area while their parents received medical care. Former homeless individuals, now employed through the program's job initiative, worked as community ambassadors, helping newcomers navigate the services. A television crew interviewed people throughout the day, capturing the profound changes. "Last year, I was sleeping behind this store," one man said, now wearing a volunteer badge. "Today, I'm helping others find the same help I received. That's what I call justice." The police academy had completely revamped its training program. New recruits now spent time working in homeless shelters and medical clinics as part of their education. The old approach of confrontation and control had been replaced with compassion and understanding. Dr. Chen's research had expanded into a comprehensive study being adopted by hospitals nationwide. Emergency rooms across the country were implementing his protocols for treating homeless patients with dignity and providing continued care. His simple act of living on the streets for a month had sparked a healthcare revolution. Thompson's daughter, fully recovered and heading to medical school herself, spoke to a group of young police cadets. "My father's biggest mistake became his greatest opportunity for growth," she said. "Sometimes our worst moments can lead us to our best selves." The mayor announced a new city initiative inspired by their work, a combined police medical response unit specially trained for helping homeless individuals. Other cities had already begun copying the model, reporting significant drops in arrests and increases in successful interventions. As the sun began to set on the health fair, something extraordinary happened. The gathering turned into an impromptu community celebration. Someone brought out speakers, and music filled the air. Police officers, doctors, homeless individuals, and community members all danced together, the barriers of status and position completely forgotten. An elderly homeless woman approached Thompson and Dr. Chen, tears in her eyes. "A year ago, I was afraid to even look at a police officer," she said. "Now they know my name. They ask about my grandchildren. They treat me like a human being." The convenience store's security camera, which had captured the original incident, now recorded a very different scene. A community united, healing, and growing together. The footage would be used in police training videos across the country, not as an example of what went wrong, but as proof of what could go right. As night fell, lanterns were lit around the parking lot. People gathered in circles, sharing stories of transformation. Former adversaries had become friends. Those who once feared each other now worked together. The city had not just changed its policies, it had changed its heart. Dr. Chen addressed the crowd one final time that evening. "A year ago, a single act of violence brought us together," he said. "But it's thousands of acts of kindness that have kept us together." Thompson stood beside him, nodding in agreement, his badge reflecting the lantern light, a symbol not of authority now, but of service. The legacy they created would continue long after that night. Other cities would study their model, adapt their programs, and learn from their journey. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the simplest, the proof that change is possible, that forgiveness can heal, and that even the deepest wounds can become bridges to understanding. As the crowd began to disperse, Thompson and Dr. Chen looked at each other, remembering how far they'd come. "Ready for another year?" Dr. Chen asked with a smile. Thompson looked around at their transformed community and nodded. "Always," he replied. "There's still work to be done." The story that began with a punch thrown in anger had ended with a community drawn together in hope. And in that transformation lay the truest form of justice, not revenge, but redemption, not punishment, but growth, not division, but unity.